Welcome back. I'm Charles Lewis, the Austin area realtor who brings you topics and discussions that will help you make better decisions when you buy, sell, or invest in real estate. Today, I'm with my friend and fellow Keller Williams agent, Jan Gunter. Jan, thanks for coming in today.
It's great to be here, Charles. I'm excited to talk with you.
Jan has distinguished herself as an expert on land, whether she's representing the farmer who's trying to sell off his land or the buyer wanting to buy undeveloped land. I thought it would be invaluable to gain understanding about a land transaction from her experience. So Jan, someone is going to be interested in purchasing land for one of three reasons. They're going to purchase it to build their dream house. They're going to purchase it to maybe subdivide it, put multiple houses on there, or they're just going to buy the land to hold on to it. The idea of it's going to appreciate.
Yes, and I would add one to that. They're going to buy it for recreational purposes because they want to go out and play on the land. It's their weekend play. And maybe they're going to build a house and they're also going to play on the land, hunt, enjoy it, that sort of thing.
Okay, so there's four reasons. Well, what I was trying to get to is that regardless of the reason why someone might purchase the land, there probably are some things that every one of them need to be aware of, or at least make it part of their due diligence before they actually move forward with purchasing. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. It's just like buying a house in that sense. That but the things you have to do are different. And so just like with the house, you're going to want to talk to a lender first, and also really have an idea. Obviously, as you pointed out, what is your purpose? And depending on your purpose, do you need to do some preparation for that? For example, if you're going to build a house, you need to at least, depending on your timeline, are you going to build it really soon? In which case you should probably already talk to that builder and make sure that is something that's doable, and use that as part of your due diligence in terms of knowing where you're going to purchase.
What about things as simple as say like the ability to tie into the city a sewer versus a septic system?
Absolutely. The utilities, that's question number one. What's the availability of the electricity? Is it already there on the property? Do I have to, when I come in, do I have to get the electricians to bring that line in there? Is that doable? And is there water available? What is the water source? Am I going to are we going to have to drill a well? In which case I need to know how much that's going to cost me. That can vary depending on how deep that water table is on that particular piece of land or that particular region. And then also the sewer. Most of these properties where you're building land in a rural area, you're going to have a septic system. So you need to have an understanding about what that expense is, and at some point you're going to need to pretty early on talk to somebody that installs septic systems so that you can understand what that process means and what's it going to the timeline and the expense of it. So yeah, utilities, that's question number 1, 2, 3. Right,
gotcha. Okay, so utilities, the water source, and then of course the kind of related to sewage is also on there, right? I mean, we're just assuming if we're pretty much out there, we're probably going to have septic.
And then you need to understand also in a rural area, and even sometimes in the sort of near urban, you may not have zoning. You probably will have, perhaps you'll have restrictions on the land. Maybe, maybe not. So a lot of times what you'll have is a rancher or farmer is selling off parcels of land. So you may be buying 10 acres out of this parcel, or 5 or 1. And so are there restrictions that convey with the land? And those restrictions could be like a paragraph or two, or they could be pages and pages. And it could include such basic things as a site-built home is required, which would mean there are no mobile homes or manufactured homes allowed in this area. Maybe that's on there. Sometimes they just have a general provision about no junk in the yards, because there's nothing worse than you building a really nice house and then your neighbor's got a junkyard in their front yard. And so the restrictions are not only something that are important for you to understand what can we do on this property, but they're also important to understand what can they do on this property, because you're building in a neighborhood, but right now it may just be a cornfield. And so what's that neighborhood going to look like in the future? Well, those restrictions are one key to what that could become in the future. And so they not only limit you and prescribe things for you, but they also help create a certain environment in the neighborhood. They can be as complicated as you have to have a house of a certain square footage, minimum 1,500, minimum 1,800, minimum 2,200. The house has to have masonry on the exterior, in which case you can't build a barn dominium.
Right.
And not only all of these things, but it also has to be reviewed by the architectural committee. So it can be very basic, it can also be very complex. The important thing is that you get your hands on those restrictions and you know exactly what they are.
If I was purchasing in a neighborhood, I would get the HOA covenants, right? It would tell me
Yes.
what I can and can't do. Is there a similar document when you're purchasing land and that used to be a farm that's now being subdivided?
Well, sometimes you will be purchasing that rural property and it already is in a subdivision that does have a POA. It's usually called a POA, Property Owners Association.
Okay.
A lot of times it's much less sophisticated than that.
Right.
And it's just really a paragraph or two or a page or so that comes along with the deed.
On the deed.
And so you need to ask at the very beginning, are there any restrictions on the property? What are they? I want to see that document. So
Gotcha.
it's not quite as cut and dried as it would be with an HOA, in the sense that sometimes you might have to do a little bit of sleuthing. And sometimes that might not show up until you have the title search. And this brings up a whole other point, Charles, if I may. That it's so important. Many times, if you purchase a residential home, you purchase a house in a neighborhood, that title commitment comes in. Everybody knows the title commitment came in, but you're just like, I don't really need to read that. It's really hard to read. What does it all mean anyway? But you know that your title is protected, and that's the important thing. Well, with a rural property, it's much more important that you pay attention to what that title commitment says. If that farm's been in somebody's family since the 1800s, it's been a long time since anybody looked at whatever, documents may have conveyed with that property. There could be easements on that land. There could be all sorts of things that you need to know about. And so the title commitment, in this case, you need somebody to help you be able to understand what that is saying. And sometimes some restrictions might show up. You might not have known about them before, but when the title commitment comes in, they say, oh, and these are the restrictions that go with that deed.
What about things like mineral rights, water rights? You'd mentioned, easements, and it just kind of came to my mind that may or may not be part of
Absolutely.
the transaction.
That will also show up in the title commitment. If those minerals have been severed, many times people will say, oh, I want all the mineral rights. And you may or may not actually be able to do that. Most Texas land, somewhere back there, going back to the 1800s, those mineral rights have already been severed. And it's hard to find a property where you can also know that you're going to be able to buy all of acquire all of the mineral rights. That's going to come out in the title commitment. And you're going to see that. And many times at that point, on property where there's been a lot of mineral activity, some counties around here are, there's been a lot of mineral activity. And so you've got all these documents where there was a lease and then there were royalties and there's like, oh my goodness, how do I understand all of this? And so at that point, many times you would want to have a conversation with a mineral rights attorney, which can be done fairly quickly. A good specialist can help you understand really what that means to you before you actually purchase that land. I want to say something else about the title commitment, if I may.
Sure,
One of the first properties I ever sold was 10 acres and a house. It was this lovely house, and the house was 10 or 15 years old, beautiful, out in Milam County, east of here. And when the title commitment came in, it had like 30 or so exceptions to the title. And I was just terrified. I'm like, I don't even know what all this means. And I was talking to my broker, and there was a cemetery that showed up on here. And so we had walked this 10 acres. We're like, I don't think there's a cemetery on the land. And so we did some digging and we talked to the surveyor. And this 10 acres, of course, used to be part of something much larger. And it was actually a part of a very large ranch, probably 1,000 acres or more. And so a couple miles away, there was a cemetery that had originally been part of this whole parcel. Well, as it got smaller and smaller, nobody had ever bothered to look at that and say, that cemetery isn't anywhere near this little 10-acre piece of property. So I said to the surveyor, can you certify that cemetery is not on this
It's not
property?
here.
And get the title company to remove it. So they removed that restriction. So that cemetery restriction is no
It's no
longer
longer there
with
'cause-
that
yeah,
with
yeah.
that property. And that's just an example of the crazy things that can happen when you're looking at a title commitment for a rural property.
Well, it certainly sounds like that if someone is interested in purchasing some land, that it's in your best interest to understand what it is you can and can't do on it, understand what rights are going to convey. And I brought up the thing about mineral. I know that probably isn't a big thing.
It can be a very big thing for people.
In what respect?
Usually for the smaller parcels of property, you're probably not in danger of somebody coming to try to drill on your 10 acres because it's not worth their trouble. But again, that's the conversation you have with the mineral rights attorney as opposed to, the agent who can't certify anything like that,
Makes sense.
Yeah. And what's interesting now also is water rights. That's becoming something that people are now starting to retain, as we know that water is the new precious resource. It's always been the most precious resource, but we're really understanding that now as we're, having challenges with just protecting the water reserves that we have. And so you want to know if the water rights are conveying with the property as well.
Are you talking about the ability to drill a well? Could be impacted by water rights or other types of water?
You would be able to drill a well on the land anyway, unless that was restricted. You might have to get approval for that well, and you likely will, get approval to drill the well. Actually, like some counties are, selling the water. For example, pumping in water from some of the eastern counties into Austin and San Antonio.
Okay.
So that water is being bought by the landowners in those counties because they sit over that aquifer where the water is coming from.
Okay.
So if you own that land in that rural county where the company has come to you and said, we want to buy your water, then maybe you decide when you sell that land, I'm going to sell that land, but I'm not going to sell those water rights.
Gotcha.
So just like mineral rights, they can be severed from the actual piece of property.
Okay.
So there's more of that going on as water has become, as we've become more aware that water is such a critical resource for us that we are having to, protect in order to be able to have enough of it for future generations.
Not to mention, just as your population grows, the amount of water that you need. It's one if you have one family, but now if you've got thousands of families, that's a big difference in the amount of water. The water consumption. So,
yes.
This has been very, very helpful. I know I've found it helpful, and I'm sure that folks out here have as well. Before we wrap this up, do you have any other thoughts or anything you might want to add?
Well, I just think that for anybody looking to buy land, that you really want to get somebody who knows what they're doing. The residential agent may or may not have those skills, and so I would encourage you to find a land specialist. There are lots of great people out here, including myself, who have the skills and the specialty to help buyers navigate. And so I want everybody to have the best chance they have of making the best decision. And one of the ways to do that is to find a land specialist.
If you'd like to talk to either one of us directly, our contact information is in the video description. If you had any ideas on how we might improve these videos or topics you might want to see in the future, shoot us an email or put it in the comments below. Once again, thanks for watching, and let's make your real estate dreams come true.